go into it. So
Mhm.
our least depressing segment for today deals with the complete and utter incompetence of those that are supposed to govern us, and whether or not the government will stay open, and thus affecting the lives of millions of workers all around the United States that depend on their own salary, whose salaries depend on the government staying open.
Boy, you really know how to lighten the mood. So, okay, so 2 weeks ago,
how's Speaker Kevin McCarthy doing?
well, I don't know who you're talking about. I know a dude named Kevin McCarthy, but I don't know anybody named Speaker Kevin McCarthy.
What? Did something happen?
Yeah, so about 2 weeks ago, something happened for the first time in American history. The Speaker of the House of Representatives was fired via a vote to vacate the speakership. So, yeah.
Which I will say, I'm actually kind of surprised that this is the first time that's ever happened.
Me too. Yeah, I mean,
You know?
we've had some pretty contentious times in American history. I think
Yeah.
I think what marks this one is the infighting. Cuz typically you'll
Yeah.
have contention between the parties, and even if they're like, you know, even if they totally hate each other, if they're really like polarized, as long as you have cohesion on one side and one side has a majority, which they have to have, like you're fine. You elect a speaker. But I feel like it's the infighting on the Republican side that's really making the difference this time.
Yeah, absolutely. So what happened? Why did Kevin McCarthy get ousted by his own party?
Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
going on here?
Okay. So let's get into it. So, as we already mentioned, Kevin McCarthy, the speaker, was ousted by members of his own party, plus all the Democrats. So basically, we have a really closely divided House, uh, and it only takes a few people defecting to get a majority on any given issue. And so part of the reason Kevin McCarthy was ousted was kind of the result of groundwork that was laid right at the beginning of his speakership back in January. So in a way, like, I have been kind of expecting this. I think the nation has been kind of expecting that at some point McCarthy would be ousted as speaker.
Yeah.
And part of the reason we thought that, and we've been thinking that, is, first of all, it took 15 votes to even get him the gavel as speaker. And in order to get the farthest right members of the Republicans in the House to support his bid for speaker and then elect him with a simple majority, he had to give in a bunch of concessions. And so one of the concessions that Kevin McCarthy made is establishing a rule that any one member of the House can initiate a motion to vacate the speakership. And so all then it takes is enough people to vote to vacate to like remove him from that position. And so basically, because the House is so closely divided, all it takes is a few members of the hard right faction of the Republicans to join all the Democrats in order to remove Kevin McCarthy from his position.
So they basically installed a dunking booth on the speaker's chair and gave everybody a button for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so, like, yeah, it was a bit of a poison pill kind of from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so ultimately, like, from that kind of desperate start, things have like only gotten more and more desperate for McCarthy throughout his speakership. And basically his whole goal has been to keep his job and to stay in power. And as a result, he's basically been playing all sides and lying to everybody just to try to keep things afloat. And I mean, I don't know how many TV shows like have that as the premise where like it just doesn't work. It's farcical. Eventually the House of Cards, no pun intended, comes down.
Here's the thing about leadership in Washington. You need to be one of two things. All right. You need to be either reasonable or ruthless. All right. And McCarthy is neither. All right. You got leaders like Mitch McConnell, who is quite possibly the most effective leader that the Republicans in the Senate have ever had. Now, he is an evil piece of shit,
Yeah.
and he represents everything that is wrong with Washington.
Sure.
But he
sure.
is effective. He is
Yeah.
absolutely effective. And he's effective because he's ruthless.
Mhm.
All right. Which is why he has managed to stay where he is, despite the fact that he is not in Trump's good graces, because he just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah.
All right.
And no
he
one
doesn't give a
fucking
shit.
crosses him.
Yeah, no one crosses him. You know, he literally just goes out there and says, yeah, I know, I'm a corrupt piece of shit and everyone hates me. So what? What the fuck are you going to do about it? Like, that's his whole thing.
Not a
all
direct
right?
quote. This is a dramatization for effect.
Kevin McCarthy, on the other hand, is such a fucking, and I know Michael hates this word, but he is such a fucking cuck and such a fucking weak-willed, spineless invertebrate. But at the same time, he is not at all reasonable. He is not willing to reason with people that are, he's not willing to reach across the aisle and potentially create some level of compromise. He is still just as much of a Republican hack as anybody else.
Yeah.
And what's funny is that Democrats probably would have been willing to do some type of negotiation with Kevin McCarthy to give him just a few votes to let him keep his job if he had been willing to work with them on a permanent funding bill to keep the government open. And he didn't do that. So Democrats were like, okay, fuck you. We're voting along with with vacating you.
Yeah.
And then he had the fucking nerve to come out there after he lost his speakership and say, well, this is because of the Democrats. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Are you kidding me, man? Who controls the House? Who controls the House? Oh, yeah, it's Republicans.
Yeah, totally. And you, Kevin McCarthy, never tried to make a deal with Democrats to save your job. Like you weren't coming to the table. You were intentionally avoiding coming to the table. And so ultimately, to your point, it took 8 hard right Republicans to fire Kevin McCarthy. Currently, there's an interim speaker. Basically, all he can do is call for a vote for a new speaker. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so all of this was kicked off by negotiations over funding the government. And so if you recall, over the summer, we had a debt crisis, and McCarthy used that crisis to get to negotiate with Biden terms to reduce key spending in the budget. And so they reached this budget deal, which was truly a compromise in a lot of ways. Like, both parties gave on some stuff. Ultimately, it seems like Biden had a bit of the upper hand, but partially, when the hostage taker is willing to shoot the hostage, i.e., when Kevin McCarthy's willing to let the U.S. default on its debt, you pretty much have to give in on some stuff. But then, because the hard right faction within the Republican House majority was not happy with that deal, when it came around to allocate additional government funding, which was a separate process to keep the government open just a few weeks ago, the hard right faction was putting pressure on McCarthy to renege on his deal with Biden and push for more spending cuts, so basically at this point, McCarthy has lied to everybody in the House, to the Democrats, Republicans, to the president, and basically has trust of nobody. And so at the last minute, at the end of September, McCarthy kind of finally caved and ended up supporting and allowing a bill to come to the floor, and that ultimately passed. There was a continuing resolution to fund the government through the 17th of November. And ultimately, this was critical because keeping the government open, as Nathan mentioned, affects literally millions of people's lives, not only people that are paid by the government, but people that rely on government assistance for, eating. And the hard right Republicans were so fucking pissed off about this that they initiated this motion to vacate. But ultimately, McCarthy laid all of he made his own bed here, because to Nathan's point, McCarthy had never like sufficiently worked with Democrats to demonstrate any kind of goodwill that might enable them to save his job. And he had lied to the Republicans on his side as well, or at least so they claimed. And so like he literally was out of sufficient
Yeah.
allies to just keep his job in this case, just because he kept
And
fucking over everybody.
And look, that goes back to what I was saying about either being reasonable or being ruthless. If he
Yeah.
were ruthless, he would have either demanded what the rest of his party was calling for.
Mhm.
He would have shut that shit down.
Mhm.
And if he was reasonable, he would have worked with Democrats.
Yeah.
All right. And you have to do one or the other, and he did neither.
Yeah.
So that is why he's no longer speaker.
Yep. Exactly. Which is somewhat nerve-wracking because, like, yes, Kevin McCarthy was a piece of shit who was basically being run by the most hard right faction of the Republican House. And yet, we might be faced with like even worse options and a looming crisis that potentially will shut down the government again in mid-November. So literally a month from now, we might be in the exact same situation without a speaker.
So far, we've gone through two potential options, one of which is extremely unreasonable, and one of which is extremely fucking unreasonable. One of which straight up said at one point, "I'm David Duke without the baggage."
Mm-hmm.
Who, by the way, was the more reasonable one. It was the more reasonable. We're talking about the more reasonable one.
I'm really curious
Scalise,
what David Duke has, if not baggage. He's just a puppet made of baggage. What, like, if racism isn't baggage, what is?
Yeah. I guess like I'm all the racism of David Duke, but like people don't know me.
Yeah,
I guess.
Exactly. Without the name recognition.
Yeah, I'm such an insignificant figure in U.S. politics right now that, at least people don't know how fucking racist I am.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But so we were thinking it might have been Steve Scalise for a hot second, but then some of the more reasonable Republicans were like, I'm not a huge fan of David Duke, actually. I don't really like that guy. He's not great guy. So Scalise didn't have the votes. Now we are staring down the barrel of Jim fucking Jordan.
Oh, man.
And I will say, I made a prediction that I obviously wasn't able to share on the pod because we were off, but I made a prediction that I was wrong about. Because I actually thought that Jim Jordan would have been the smartest choice for Republicans. Not for the country, obviously. He would have been the worst choice for the country, like ever, of any of these people. But what I was thinking was, this is a guy that definitely does have MAGA credentials.
Yeah.
Right? Like, but he also does have a certain level of establishment credentials too. Because, I mean, this is a guy who sits as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, which is an extremely prestigious role.
Yeah.
And you have to be some level of, like, you have to have good standing with the Republican Party at large in order to have a position like that.
Yeah.
So he is somebody who has, in my estimation, he was somebody with 1 foot in the establishment camp and 1 foot in the MAGA camp.
Yeah.
And because of that, I thought he might actually be able to unify people. However, apparently there are some more reasonable Republicans, more so than I thought there were, that are actually really hung up on the fact that this is a dude who is still an election denier. Who was straight up cheering on the January 6th riots.
Yeah.
And still to this day believes that claims that he thinks that the election was stolen.
Wow. So you're saying that the hard left, extremely liberal Republicans that aren't in favor of electing a House Speaker, that is in favor of overthrowing the government. Wow. That's pretty remarkable.
Apparently, that's what it means to be a a hard left in the United States Congress, believing we shouldn't overthrow fucking America. And so far, it's looking like it might not be him either. There have been 2 votes, one of which, obviously, every Democrat voted against him, joined by 20 Republicans. And then there was another vote where 22 Republicans voted against him.
Good, making progress.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stop. We're supposed to be going up.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting. I think that's like an interesting effect here. Like the power vacuum that's occurring right now just demonstrates that these 8 Republicans are really just, chaos agents. They're not interested in governing. They're just trying to get headlines and attention, and make sure that the House can't do anything. Which is what House Rules Chair Tom Cole said. He said, quote, "Nobody knows what's going to happen next, including all the people that voted to vacate. They have no earthly idea what. They have no plan. They have no alternatives at this point. It's just simply a vote for chaos." And so it's just not clear what the path is. Like one potential long shot is to actually take the temporary speaker who, again, all he can do is just call for a vote on a new speaker and attempt to expand his temporary powers, at least to try to avoid a government shutdown in November, which is actually an option that some moderate Democrats appear to potentially be supporting. Another big long shot is the potential for trying to establish some kind of coalition, bipartisan, like speakership, which is very intriguing to me, although it does not seem likely at all. Which would essentially be all the Democrats, and it only takes a few Republicans to defect to select a new speaker for the position that is kind of acceptable for both sides, and in a way kind of cobble together like a bipartisan person in the position. Although Democrats have said that they would expect significant power sharing rules in writing that in order to be able to support this idea. So the problem is like the Republicans in the House, at least my interpretation is, they're more likely to just allow the government to remain in a stalemate and not function than they would be to join with Democrats to try to get some kind of functional person in a position.
I mean, part of this just comes down to what the MO of the Republican Party is, which the MO of the Republican Party is ineffective government.
Yes.
That's their whole thing.
Yeah. It's the proof of the thing that they always claim.
Electing a Republican to run the government is like electing a vegan to run a burger place.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, they don't value
shitty burgers.
Yeah, they don't value the government actually functioning. They don't want the government to function, because if the government actually functions, then that means that it might actually, help people in need. It might mean that the government might regulate the big businesses that are the donors for these Republicans' campaigns. They don't want that. All right. So they don't have any incentive. They don't have any real incentive to actually make this go through, to actually get a real speaker. Honestly, I have no idea how this is going to go.
I agree.
I have no idea how this is going to end. I am honestly wondering if this is just going to be the new norm until the next election.
Yeah.
Because I don't see them being able to cobble together votes for some. If it can't be Jordan, it can't be Scalise. I mean, maybe they can try to put in Patrick McHenry, who's the current interim, with maybe a few Democratic votes.
Yeah,
if
maybe
they do some concessions, maybe that can happen. But I don't know how this is going to end. I have no predictions at all.
Yeah, same. Yeah, I don't see how you get the far extremes of the Republican Party to meet in the middle anywhere. I just don't. It just doesn't add up. You know, except for one potential option, Nathan. And this is the scariest one of them all.
Oh, I know what you're about to say.
Trump.
Yeah.
So Trump was on Fox News and said, quote, "I have been asked to speak as a unifier because I have so many friends in Congress. If they don't get the vote, they have asked me if I would consider taking the speakership until they get somebody long term because I'm running for president. They have asked me if I would take it for a short period of time for the party until they come to a conclusion. I'm not doing it because I want to. I will do it if necessary, should they not be able to make their decision." So when I heard that, I was like, how the fuck is that even allowed?
Yeah, well, because the speaker does not have to actually be a rep.
Blows my mind. They should just pick
It
fucking Joe
always has
Schmo
been.
out of nowhere, just like some random person.
So here's what I will say about that. Even if that does happen, I give it 2 weeks
Tops,
because
yeah.
Trump would find the job so fucking boring.
Exactly. You know what the speaker does? Paperwork.
Yeah. He would find the job so fucking boring that he would go nuts and just quit.
Mm-hmm.
I do not think there's any way he could, like, because again, the speaker's job is to basically call on other people to speak.
Yeah.
And he would hate that. He would hate that.
He's like, when they said to be the speaker, I thought they meant that I would get to speak all the time, but boy, bad name, real bad. Yeah. Plus, according to at least the current House rules, if you are charged with a felony that holds a potential sentence of up to 2 years or longer, then you're not eligible to be the House Speaker. Now, they could change those rules, but even that would require, I would assume that they would have to have a speaker to do that. So,
yeah,
I don't know.
Because the only thing they can do is call a vote for another speaker.
Exactly.
So,
and I think every time there's a speaker question,
vote,
people are like, how about Trump? And it's like, do you guys just only know one name? Is that the problem? Every other name you say has to be Trump, or you like, I don't know, get some kind of brain aneurysm. Like, it's absurd. But so he's not going to be speaker, and he, hopefully, God damn it. But like ultimately, to your point, Nathan, I have no clue where we go from here. I have no clue how this ends, and I really want the government to stay open.